Hi, everyone. Welcome to our session 5 on vulnerability tonight. Uh, it's thanks for coming. And I will pass on the floor to Eva, and I will ask Sarah and Lynn also to introduce themselves.
Great, thanks, Valerie. So I'm Eva D'Agostini. I'm the one that's going to be presenting the information today on vulnerability and understanding adverse childhood experiences. Hopefully it will help you to understand children. I've been working in the field with children in schools for many, many years, and have taken an interest in the last probably about 10 years in the area of understanding vulnerability and adverse childhood experiences or complex trauma. So I'll share that with you, and looking to uh, the sharing that we're going to have next week for those of you that will be able to join us, and also to your questions and comments, and also for those of Sarah and Lynn. So I will pass it on to Sarah.
Quick Asinuichek, Sarah Clarin Dishnigashin, Mastriach Nuchin. I'm working at FNEC. I'm a student success counselor in language and culture. Also a person, a two-spirit person who try to reconnect with the tradition, traditional knowledge. I try to learn the language, and I try to learn from Eva, Lynn, Helder, who can just give me some good teaching about how to be a better person that interact better with the children. I think the children are the future for our First Nation, and they can, we can help them heal and discover and build a new future for the children in their communities. So I'll introduce, well, Lynn will introduce, she's our guest for those session, so those workshop.
Sego, Sewagwego. I'm Lynn Jacobs. I work at Cattery School in Kahnawake. All of my years in education have been at the Cattery School. So I've been there for about 31 years, I guess, 33 years, 32, somewhere around there. And the work I do now is in the Skanagora room, which means big peace. And I look at holistic wellness, not just for our students, but for our parents and for our teachers, wherever I can be of support, with our spiritual and cultural background. I've been a classroom teacher, vice principal, and now the title I have is called student support teacher. So wherever I can offer support for students in order for them to have success in their elementary school years. I work with a team. I don't work alone. We have an awesome student services team, and one of our members have joined us today, Francine. She's our social counselor. So we work very closely together in order to meet our student needs. And we have a lot of our preschool teachers online with us today. So the knowledge, I'm just an honor to be part of this panel. The knowledge that I'm gaining from all of you is it's just incredible. And I look forward to my Wednesdays. I come, sit on my recliner, put my feet up, and wherever I can, offer my experiences. It's not just life experiences too. I do my best what I can. So go.
Well, I certainly really appreciate it, Lynn, because I'm going to be sharing again some of the work of Dr. Gordon Neufeld, but it's very, very important that this material also resonate with your culture and with the children that that you are all caring for. So I'm going to share my screen. There we go. Hopefully that works. Everybody can see it. Yeah.
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. Thank you. So we're going to be looking at the effects of, so understanding vulnerability and really looking at the effects of adverse childhood experiences on children's development. We're going to be using a number, some different terminology. Sometimes I'll use trauma, sometimes I'll use complex trauma, developmental trauma. There's many, many words for that. But the bottom line is that things happen in children's lives. And of course, we know that in most of your communities, not only did this happen to is this happening to some of the children in the current generation, but this is something that happened through many generations, and it had a huge, huge impact on growth and development. And I'm hope that you will understand that I'm trying to be as sensitive as I can. I do not want to point fingers at anyone. I do not want to make anyone feel guilty. But I want to share an understanding that I have come to through the work of Dr. Neufeld, through the understanding of trauma, through neuroscience, of why some of the children in our care, in your care particularly, especially your 4, 5, and 6-year-olds, can be so incredibly difficult and frustrating and hard to manage, and you just don't know what to do with them on some days. And so I'm hoping to increase understanding in the light of everything that we've learned to date. And if there are people here that are new, I try always in our session to make it as complete as possible. So if you have not attended the other sessions, you'll still get what we're talking about. But it's also helpful if you go back and review the first 4 sessions that have brought us to this point. Obviously, what we're looking at is there's a child's behavior. It's on the surface. It's like the tip of an iceberg. But what we really want to be understanding is what's underneath. Where does that behavior come from? Why is it there? Sometimes the behavior can seem so irrational. Sometimes children do things literally what we call, sort of bite the hand that feeds them. Like they're the worst, they behave the worst, they're the meanest to the people that are trying to be the nicest to them. And that is often what happens with many of you. You move heaven and earth for this child, and then they turn on you. And it would be so easy to just stay at the surface, but we really need to understand what is underneath all of that. In the developmental approach, we look at 3 big things, 3 big keys. Where is the child at in terms of their maturation? And constantly need to remind ourselves that our 4-year-olds, our 5-year-olds, and some of our early 6-year-olds are very, very immature in terms of their brain development. And so some of the behaviors that I'm going to describe have nothing to do with adverse childhood experiences. Some of it just has to do with the fact that this is an immature child. We look at what it takes to grow and develop, and that means softness. Well, softness means vulnerability. So we're going to look at what happens today when vulnerability is overwhelmed. And then, of course, always come back to where can children feel the safe to be vulnerable? That is with the people that can take care of them through the instincts of attachment. So our basic vulnerability principles are that growth requires softness, which means being vulnerable. And again, I love this picture. And our star Sarah is here. And this little girl is completely putting herself into Sarah's hands. Talk about the ultimate vulnerability. She just trusts that Sarah will take care of her. And that softness is holding this little girl in incredibly good stead. She's growing and developing, I'm sure, very beautifully in the context of that safe attachment. But when the brain senses that it is too vulnerable, and things that make the child too vulnerable are separation and trauma, it starts to protect itself. And the most important thing that we need to understand, which is both a negative and a positive, is that when the brain is protecting itself, it can't be growing. But the other side of it is that if we can help the brain to stop protecting itself, it will start growing. So there's always hope for even the child or the adult who has experienced the most difficult of situations. So when there is just too much going on, basically we are made as human beings to put this shell on. But when the shell goes on, adaptation, emergence, and integration stop developing as they should. And so some of you, if you're working with older children, and I know Lynn works with children all the way up to about grade 6, some of the children that she takes care of have been stunted in their growth in that way. And she knows that, and she recognizes and understands they need what a younger child might need. But we as the adults need to understand that this is where the child is at. And of course, I'm sure again, Lynn, at the end of our session here, I'm sure you'll have stories to tell of children who have come to your room and all of a sudden blossomed, right? And this is what the developmental approach is about, is if we can take that shell off, then our children will blossom and grow and develop. There's always hope for growth and development. Of course, what is it that makes us as human beings feel the most vulnerable? Well, that is facing separation, experiencing it or facing it, the lack or the loss of closeness to those to whom we are attached. And of course, we know that many of the adults in our communities, the grandparents in our communities, faced huge amounts of separation, especially when they went to the residential schools or if they were involved. I don't know if that was so much Quebec, but I know in Manitoba, the 60s scoop where children were just taken from their homes and brought to adoptive homes. So that loss has had a profound impact on the growth and the development, both physical, psychological and intellectual and emotional growth of people. The Australian Childhood Foundation in Australia, by the way, has a very large Indigenous population as well. And they have really studied trauma, and I'm very inspired by them and many of the things that they use. So one of the things when we talk about complex childhood trauma or adverse childhood experiences, they remind us that it involves repeated relational harm that comes from physical, emotional, or sexual abuse, significant emotional or physical neglect, or family and other forms of interpersonal violence that is directed towards infant and children by the people on whom they depend for protection, nurture, and care. It's like a betrayal. And the thing about it is that we sometimes parents who are supposed to take care of the children absolutely cannot. But if they can hand those children off to other people who can care for them, the child will be okay. Where it becomes difficult for the child is when the adults who are supposed to take care of them, whoever they are, consistently just don't do a very good job and don't understand what happens to them when they experience this kind of a situation. Now, I'm going to refer to another study because this study helps us to understand some of the key factors. And it was a huge study that was done in the United States. And they weren't looking at all at trauma. They were just, it was an insurance company that was just trying to figure out who are the best people to insure? Who are the ones that are not going to get sick? Because insurance companies love to insure people who aren't going to get sick. And so they did this huge study. And as a result of that study, they found some things that really shocked them. And what they found was that they determined, they asked people all sorts of things that happened to them, and then they tried to link that to how sick they got. And they finally came out, because they had so many people, they're able to notice or identify 10 categories of childhood experiences that had a huge impact on the physical and mental health of people. Um, the only thing I want to remind you here is that these things don't necessarily, in and of themselves, you know, uh, say that you're never going to get better. So these experiences say, oh my goodness, if you've gone through this, it's going to have an impact on you. The thing about trauma is that it's not only about what you experienced, it's about who was there and who helped you when you experienced it, right? And so it's not kind of like a determining factor, it's an end all and be all. But if we get a sense of what these things are, we get a sense of kind of what we need to pay attention to. So the 10 that they found, I'm going to go through them very quickly right now, because what I want to show you is when they counted how many of these people had, what they found both in terms of physical and mental health. And then I'll go back and go through them a little bit more in detail. So emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, lack of family support, physical neglect, loss of a parent, witnessing domestic violence, familial substance abuse, familial mental illness, and a family member in prison. So when they checked these boxes off for different people, what they found was that if you had a score of 4 or more, so you checked 4 or more of these boxes, the likelihood of you getting lung disease increased by 390%. Hepatitis by 240%, depression by 460%, and suicide by 1,220%. So not only do you get physically ill from having these kinds of experiences, but obviously your mental health is affected. What's really scary is when they got to a score of 6 or more, because if you had 6 or more, you're likely to become highly likely to become a drug user. And if you have 10 or more, you're very likely to become homeless, be in prison for life, have death by suicide. And if you have high A scores, you're likely to die 20 years earlier. What this basically says to me is that when things don't go well in your family life, it has a huge impact on you. And we need to recognize it, honor it, and work with it. And that's one of the things I'm going to, by the end of the session today, you're not going to be quite as depressed as maybe you are right now. By the end of the session today, I will give you things that you can do to help the experiences that some of the children in your care have had for it not to have such a dramatic and negative effect on them. So again, just very quickly looking at some of these. Well, emotional abuse, it can be by a parent or it can be by a sibling. Some parents are very mild-mannered and they don't hurt their children at all, but because they are themselves overwhelmed, sometimes the older children in a family take care of the younger children and because of their immaturity don't do a very good job of it. Or physically abuse, again, a parent or a sibling or somebody else in the larger family life. Or sexual abuse. Or just a lack of family support. The family just, they kind of do their best, but they just can't be there for you in the way that they should. And sometimes to the point of physical neglect, where you don't have enough food, where you don't have enough clothing, where you don't have the right kind of clothing. Now, the loss of a parent, it can come through separation or divorce. So, in other words, a parent like basically leaves because the relationship is not working, or the parent has to go away for long periods of time. Sometimes it can be because, you're going for treatment, you're going for mental health treatment, you're going for substance abuse treatment. It's not necessarily a bad thing that the absence is there, but from the perspective of a child, I don't have the people there. I don't have a lot of people in my life taking care of me. Situations where there's been multiple step parents. Very often people will say to me, no, no, but this is a very loving mother. She's doing the best she can. But then you realize that there have been 2, 3, 4 partners that have come and gone with their children. And so that can be very destabilizing to a child. Obviously, if a parent gets sick, if a parent dies, if a child is adopted, even adoption is seen as a loss by a child because remember the baby hears the mother's voice in the first 6 months or the last 6 months of development, and when that voice disappears, it can have an effect. Again, we can work with it, but we have to understand it's not it can have a huge effect. Obviously, witnessing domestic violence, one of my parents can't protect the other person. Substance abuse, which leads to a huge amount, sadly, of emotional distress and also neglect. Mental illness, the same thing. I one of my children has a huge problems with anxiety disorder, a huge anxiety disorder. He's much better now, but when he wasn't doing very well, he would never have been able to take care of a child. He just wouldn't have been able to do it. He was so distressed himself that he couldn't take care of a child. And a family member in prison, which of course has to do with all the things that led to the person getting into prison, but also just the loss of another person, another adult to take care of a child. Then there's other ones as well. Frequent hospitalization by a parent or a child. And again, I know some of your communities are very isolated. If a parent gets sick, they've got to go to another community. They're in that community for weeks on end. So hospitalization or the child has to go to the hospital. Death of a sibling can be hugely impactful on a child, or a sibling with special needs when the parents are going from one appointment to another appointment to a child who tantrums frequently. Children, I have one of my family members has a circumstance like that. Their son has severe autism, and the older child, who was a beautiful, well-functioning child, completely fell apart because it was just too distressing in her home because her parents were so distressed because of the care they had to give the younger child. As I mentioned before, adoption, frequent foster care. I always tell teachers in schools, please know the children in your class who are in foster care. They are going to need a whole lot of extra TLC from you. Multiple changes in parental or guardian care. Sometimes we heave a sigh of relief. Oh, finally, he or she is in a good home, but they've been in 6 or 7 homes prior to that. oh my goodness, that's going to affect the child. And then even it can be have a huge damaging effect on a child, or a negative effect on a child, if parents are constantly fighting with each other, and the child can never rest because when I'm with my mummy, I'm so scared because my daddy doesn't like my mummy, and and there's a lot of emotional distress that happens there. So what we come into is what Dr. Neufeld calls attachment alarm. As we know, we have to develop these deep roots of attachment with the adults in our care. But these roots of attachment also are things that can cause a threat to us. So sometimes a child is worried about not being able to be with their parent. Mommy, please take me. I remember one little boy living in a community on the lower North Shore. When a woman got pregnant to, I think, 8 months pregnant, she had to go into set ill to go to the hospital. This particular mother had 6 children under the age of 6, or 5 children under the age of 6, and was having her 6th child. She couldn't take the oldest child with her. There just wasn't enough room in the apartment she had to rent. So this poor little guy, he couldn't be with his mummy, and all the other children were, right? Huge distressing situation for that child. Not being the same. This is one of the factors in adoption. Not being the same as the family who is taking care of you. It can affect children. What if, not belonging, not feeling like people really want and understand and want to take care of me, not mattering and being really important, not being loved, not feeling that you're actually loved. And sometimes, especially in foster care, the foster parents do their best to love the children, but the child, can't sense that love as much. And of course, not being known, which I have a secret, and if you knew that about me, you wouldn't be able to love me. And all of these things cause attachment alarm. Now, when we're facing separation, our brain is going to try and fix the problem. Emotion means we're moved. Try to fix the problem. And so when we're facing separation, there's 3 primary emotions. And I've talked about this in a couple of the other sessions, so now you're a little bit familiar with them. But every time I think about these, they help me to understand somebody's behavior a little bit more. So the first one obviously is pursuit. We're going to try to restore proximity. And you have many children in your classrooms who, the minute you say to them, and this is perfectly normal behavior, this does not harm a child, when we say, children, and we give them that look, and then many of your children go, oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I'll listen. They don't want us to be upset with them, and they'll do everything they can to please us, and that is just lovely. And it makes it so much easier for us. But we have to be very careful because, again, if a child tries always to be too good, they stop developing. But in the short term, it works out really, really well. Children can also go into alarm. A child might not be able to be the kind of child who can say, oh, I promise to be good, I promise to be good, but they quieten right down. And sometimes that's all we want. We just want the children to quieten down so we can say to them, oh, we're going to do this fun thing, right? So there's always a back and forth. And so if some children know, and my son was very sensitive to that, he knew if the teacher's voice went up a little bit, oh, that meant you have to be careful, and he would become very quiet. And then the teacher was very happy and everything went forward. When we are facing separation, we sometimes want to effect change to fix the problem. And again, some of you will have children. It's very interesting. You kind of go, children, and you'll have one little kid pipe up, but it wasn't me. I didn't do it. I didn't do it. And the child is just trying to fix the relationship with you by saying, I wasn't the one who did it, right? And so these are very good emotions. They help us. They fix situations. They restore separation. No problem at all. What we need to remember is that they tend to be intense and sometimes be one at a time. And again, this very, very important for us to remember with our 4 and our 5-year-olds whose prefrontal cortex is not fully developed, that they can only feel one emotion at a time. And so it's not unusual, especially for a 4-year-old, to promise us one minute that they will be very, very good for us. I promise, I'll do anything you want. When I had that situation, and I've described it before, where this little guy was promising the teacher and the bell rang, and the teacher went, you know, um, okay, and just looked to see where her other children were. And when she came back, she said, now we have to go in. And well, he just basically said, I don't want to go in. You're stupid. Don't make me come in. And he was full of foul frustration. So his pursuit could be displaced by frustration or displaced by alarm. And we have to remember that sometimes, we say, well, was that child lying that he promised to do? No, he wasn't lying. It's just that when he realized he had to go in, frustration displaced his desire to please his teacher, right? And so it's important for us to understand this with our children. What we also need to understand is some children get stuck and some people get stuck in some of these strategies. When they can't fix separation, they try and fix it in a way that is now no longer that healthy. And that's why we call this intensified pursuit. Now, you have some of the children, and I was trying really hard to think of 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds. You have that little one who always wants to be first in line because now he's stuck on being first because being first means I'm important. Being important means my teacher will love me. So they are stuck on being first. Or they're stuck on constantly, Miss, look at me, look at me, look at me. When you're confident in your attachment, you don't have to do that. But some kids get stuck in that and they need us to constantly. Some children, and this is interesting because pursuit, they start taking things. I know teachers have gotten very confused, like this child, like he steals things and he puts it in his desk. And then when you say, honey, did you take it? No, he didn't take it. But the pursuit is around not so much around people, but around things, satisfying that need to have. And now it's no longer healthy. Or possessing, being very, very jealous. These are the kinds of things, or sometimes being too good. And again, most teachers that I know will occasionally say to me, I got this little kid in my class. She's just too good, Eva. And they know that it's wrong because when you're always, always, always trying to be good, and of course, in adults, we often call that being a people pleaser. You know how exhausting that is. If any of you have ever been a people pleaser, and all of us have a little bit of that in us, it's too exhausting. And we never remember who we are. We're always trying to please other people. We always end up at restaurants, not that we can do that right now, or we always end up ordering takeout in a place we don't really like very much because we're always trying to please. But of course, it has huge impact on overall development because we have to learn to please ourselves as well. So this intensified pursuit is you're kind of stuck in that way. Now, some kids are stuck this way. Some kids get stuck in alarm. Those are the kids that we very often call anxious because they're constantly worried. Am I doing the right thing? Am I doing the right thing? Because alarm moves us to caution. But also with that comes agitation. And some of the children can't talk about, am I doing the right thing? But they're always trying to look around, and then sometimes they become very hyperactive. Their body starts to move, and I'll show you in a moment why that is. And they have attention problems. It's like, and sometimes these children actually aren't agitated or hyperactive, but we basically say they're in the moon, they're dans la lune. They're kind of like quiet, but they just never seem to be there. And again, this has to do with them getting stuck in alarm. Some of our children get stuck in frustration. They basically are the kids who end up tantruming, or they end up screaming, or hitting, or kicking, kind of acting out kinds of kids, where it's the only way in which when they get worried about separation, they kind of have a meltdown. Interestingly, I only have 2 children, but my daughter was more of a frustration child and my son was completely an alarm child. Well, what was interesting, my daughter was older, so I ended up figuring out I finally realized that when she had a complete meltdown is because things were not working in her world and she was so scared she wasn't going to be a good student, a good kid, a good child, and she would have her meltdown and then we would be able to talk it through. My son, when he was scared he wasn't doing the right thing, would become very, very quiet. I thought everything was okay. I wish he had screamed and yelled a whole lot earlier in his life because it took him a long time to be able to tell me, his parent, things were not working for him. Now, if you really want to get a little depressed here, it can get even worse. It can go even down deeper and darker paths. You can get stuck, and this is what we talked about last week when we talked about the alpha instincts and the instincts to dominate, the instincts to get stuck in being the one who's always in charge. We call that defensive dominance. And when a child is facing way too much separation, some of them become very bossy, or they start telling adults what to do, or they start saying that you can't tell me what to do. I don't care what you say. I'm going to do what I want. They refuse to listen, and some of them can even move into bullying. This is because They're so scared that nobody will take care of them, they start taking care of themselves, and they get stuck in that. Other children, and again, some of these things can all happen to the same child. I don't know, if some of you know some of these kids. I'm thinking of Lynn particularly because you've known so many kids over your course of your years, but some of them get stuck in all of this stuff. It's all there in various different ways. Some of them get into what we call defensive reattachment. And the biggest place that a lot of these kids get attached to are peers or other children because they basically still need to be attached, but they've given up on the adults. And again, we had a situation in one community, Valerie, where these four little boys had given up on the adults. And we tried to help them. We moved them into this lovely little place, and they basically were impossible to manage, even though we had created a lovely environment for them, because basically they were no longer paying attention to the adults because they were starting to imitate their peers, and they became very disobedient because they were taking their cues from their peers. And I often think again of like 4-year-olds and again, those of you that are teaching 4 and 5-year-olds, you know that sometimes one child will start to get silly, and then all of the other children will start to get, at least 2 or 3 of the other children will start to get silly, and it's kind of like you can't get a word in edgewise. Well, there are some children that get stuck in that. They're always looking for somebody to lead them, but they're looking to the wrong person. You know, and then there are some children who get stuck in a flight from vulnerability, and we call this defensive detachment. And these are the children that are the hardest to handle because they just tune us out. They have huge attention problems because, again, they're paying attention to what's threatening them. They shut down or they push us away. And these are the kind of children, sometimes they're diagnosed with something called reactive attachment disorder, where they basically will turn on the people that care them the most. And again, if you've been a foster parent or an adoptive parent, sometimes these children will be so mean to you because attachment is too vulnerable for them. Now, I'm going to show you a whole slide here. And again, which basically tells all the ways in which separation can affect a child's behavior. What's fascinating to me here, though, is if we understand all of this is coming from facing a separation too much to bear, well, we know what the answer is. It's not going to be an easy answer, but we know what it is. But you know what happens is a lot of people don't know this, including some psychiatrists, other psychologists, people who do diagnosis. You take away that understanding, and now you have, the DSM-4, you have 175 different diagnoses that people can have. Well, sometimes a diagnosis will help you to get more services, but really every one of these children, basically they are facing more separation than they can bear. And we actually have the tools. We have the tools within our classrooms, within our communities, and within our schools. And Lynn, you said it the best because you said it isn't just me, it's my whole team. Because boy, when you got a kid like this, do you ever need a big team? But you have what it takes. And I know that's why your room is so successful, because you take care of these children and you let them know it's okay. We can handle all of you. So basically, what we need to understand is that this kind of trauma, this kind of intense separation does actually change the brain. It can be one thing or it can be long-term, prolonged exposure. And the researchers tell us is that basically the body is in a constant state of preparation because threat is seen everywhere. That's why there's so many attention problems, so many memory problems, because long-term memory can only come about when you're in rest. A lot of these children can never rest. Every one of them is diagnosed with a memory problem. Every one of them is diagnosed with an attention problem because their brain is too preoccupied with survival. McCrory and their whole team there looked at children exposed to family violence, and what they found is that they had the same pattern of activity in their brain as soldiers exposed to combat. PTSD. We're finally understanding PTSD. We are somewhat fortunate here in Canada, although again, if you live in Quebec City or some cities where where we're close to military bases, we know one of my schools that I work with in the English sector has, a military base. That's who their children come from. Lots of parents with PTSD. We now understand how severely that affects mental health, but children exposed to family violence. And it was in the part of the brain called the amygdala. And this was just when the soldiers and the children were shown pictures of angry faces. Nobody was threatening them. Nobody was trying to hurt them, but just the picture of an angry face was enough to cause the amygdala to fire. And basically, the amygdala is in the limbic emotional part of the brain. It's a teensy little organ that's right there, and it's like our smoke detector. And what happens with children who live in these circumstances, with soldiers who live in these circumstances, for adults who've lived in these circumstances, is you have a very, very sensitive smoke detector. The kind of smoke detector that all you have to do is turn your toaster on and it fires, right? If any of, or not fires, but starts sounding. And any, and again, I have a child, and I know other people in my close family who have these overactivated amygdalas, and they say some days are overwhelming because I just feel like I'm constantly in danger, even though nothing much is happening. Now, it's because the amygdala is right next door to the hypothalamus, which links with our nervous system and our endocrine system, and I'm going to show you in a minute what that does. But it's also linked to the hippocampus, which is involved in memory. And if the amygdala is triggered, the hippocampus says, what do I need to remember? That's going to cause trouble here. And now all the beautiful things they learned at school, they cannot pass into their long-term memory because they're spending the evening and the night trying to survive. When the hypothalamus kicks in, now there's adrenaline and cortisol and norepinephrine and growth hormone. All these things are going into our body, which are fine. These are good things. You'd never get out of bed if your sympathetic nervous system didn't tell you got to get out of bed, right? That's what your alarm is for. These are fine, but you can't have them in your system for too long because they cause damage to the brain and they cause damage to our growth and development. And all of us, by the way, right now are feeling this because COVID has increased our level of alarm. And it's exhausting to have these things in our system. And these are the things because it constricts our blood vessel, it affects our rest and digest. By the way, sometimes it makes us want to eat more, not eat less. Heart rate goes up, blood, and we have blood pressure problems, all sorts of problems. And there's this thing that's going and it's going and it's going in us. And it's absolutely exhausting. And this is what happens to a child who has experienced it because their amygdala, if we just look at them, and people have said that to me, but Eva, I didn't say anything. I didn't even raise my voice. I just said, honey, you need to come in. Well, in that child's mind, you have yelled at him because the amygdala is interpreting that, honey, sweetheart, you have to come in now. Just that you have to come in now was already enough to trigger that. And so basically, this amygdala is kindled, it fires as its danger is always there, and some of these children have incredibly rapid escalation. I did not know this many, many years ago when I was working with a classroom of children with severe behavior disorders, but I knew the story of a little boy, and it's a very, very sad story. He comes from a family that was struggling. They had a whole bunch of children under the age of 6 years old, like there was one baby after another, and they were, they had all sorts of struggles in their family life. So it wasn't the easiest family to be raised in. But the father, and to this day, my heart goes out to that man. That father said to me when this little boy came to our class, he said, listen, I'm going to tell you this. I tell this to everybody. Nobody ever wants to listen to me, but I'm going to tell it to you anyway because I know the day my son changed. Sadly, this little boy, because of all the stuff that was happening inside of his body, was getting very distressed. The daycare people were trying to handle him. They couldn't handle him. He kept running away. And so one day, sadly, the adults decided to restrain him. And they restrained him so forcibly, they actually used a physical thing to restrain him with. The father said, the day he came home from that, I knew my son was different. Well, I didn't understand all of this, but boy, did I ever experience it with that little boy because we were in the playground. The teacher, the aide, and I, or the three of us were in the playground, and the children were playing, and he was playing beautifully. He was not causing any trouble whatsoever, and the three of us were talking to each other. And we were kind of looking at him and looking at the other children, but I remember one time I looked at him and he looked at me, and I didn't know what was happening, but that look was that what was going in his mind. We were talking about him and he was in trouble. And I could sense non-verbally the reaction of his amygdala. He looked at me, he got down, and he started running away. And of course, we got into all sorts of trouble because he tried to climb over the fence and blah, blah, blah. But people say, how can it happen so quickly? But it can. And when you know it, you realize, oh my goodness, he had no choice but to run. He was terrified that we too were going to reject him. So we have to understand that. Hypervigilance, the focus is on the nonverbal. He didn't know what we were saying. He just watched our faces. It focuses on the tone of voice, the body language, the facial expression. They can't understand words. They just understand feelings. And this is one of the things why it's very, very important for us as the adults to watch our body language. If a child is running away, of course we need to take care of them, but we need to lower our shoulders and just kind of saunter towards them. If we start running towards them, they're going to run away. That's what their brain is telling them to do, right? A lot of the tactics that you use with your yoga, the adults need to use those tactics first to calm down, to look as if you're really calm. Then the amygdala says, "Oh, this is a calm adult. Okay, maybe I'm going to be okay." So because we have to know this is what they're paying attention to us. So when there is too much separation, too much shame, too much alarm, this shell goes on and it causes all sorts of problems. And of course, it goes on because they don't feel safe. They don't feel safe to express what they're feeling. Even for some very sensitive children, to say to them, "Oh, honey, no, you don't need to cry about everything." For some children, that's enough to shut the tears down. To be very careful. We have to let our children have permission to have their feelings. Of course, sometimes we take things away from children. And sadly, I remember again another situation where it was a psychiatrist who said to the mother, you got to take everything away from your son until he learns how to behave. And then luckily this was over the phone, because I think my colleague would have probably tried to do something not very nice to that psychiatrist. The mother said, "I have taken everything away from my son. He still refuses to obey." And the doctor said, "Well, is there anything else you can take away?" "Well, he still has his little, stuffed teddy bear." "Well, then take his teddy bear away." How in the world can that child ever trust adults ever again? Because we take away everything. Now, that poor mother, she was just doing what the psychiatrist told her to do. But there are still people that tell us to do that to children who are not behaving. Well, then they can't develop. The world, it just is too overwhelming for them. And then we have our very sensitive children. And again, some of the children that we've talked about also are on the autism spectrum. They are very, very sensitive, and they do put the shell on, but that's because their world is just too hard for them to process. What we see, and again, you'll notice this in the children already. I'm sure you have children in your head. They lose their playfulness, they lose their restfulness, they lose their vulnerable feeling. These are the children that even if you have nap time, they can't rest. They can't lie down. They can't trust that if you turn the lights off, that someone isn't going to hurt them. They just can't rest. And of course, if they can't rest, they grow. It stunts their development. They're much more immature. They're a 7-year-old, but they're acting like a 4-year-old. Absolutely. They don't have much flexibility. They, when things don't go well, they keep doing the things that they promise us they won't do. They run away when we say, "No, no, you need to come inside with me. Don't run away, honey." But they run away again, because when they get into distress, they just do the thing that feels the safest to them. When they get older, they stop caring. They just, "I don't care about anybody, and I don't care," and we'll say things to them like, "Well, don't you think that, wouldn't that hurt your feelings?" "Yeah, I don't like it when people say those words to me." "But honey, you said that to the other child. Don't you think that would hurt his feelings?" "I don't care. He's stupid." And now, of course, when that happens, it's really harder for us to take care of that child. And then, of course, we saw all of the problems that come when there's too much separation. And then these children, they can't heal or recover or bounce back, because they need their sadness and their tears. But when you have that shell on, you can't cry. So they risk losing their caring attachments, because, after a while, when a child tells us for the 75th time, "I don't care about you and I don't care about anybody," it's hard for us to try and continue caring for them. And again, that's why you need their team. So just a very quick thing is they have attention problems, because they're paying attention to the possible threats instead of paying attention to the adults. They have agitation and hyperactivity because their alarm system, there's too much cortisol, too much adrenaline in their bodies, right? And they're just like, "Whoo," that's going in there. They don't listen to the adults either because they feel too vulnerable, or they're attached to their peers and they're listening to their peers. They seek attention, being first, or even trying to be too good because they're trying to earn our love, right? Or they become bossy and a bully and they refuse to listen because, you know what, I need to take care of myself. They do, some of them hit and kick and scream. They're full of foul frustration, full of attacking energy because they just can't cry it out. And so they're just lashing out at everybody. And some of them just push adults away, ignore them, shut down, and just because they're overwhelmed by too much vulnerability. So we can't reason, talk to them, give them more consequences. That's not going to help. And especially talking, by the way, be very careful with these children not to talk too much because you know what? They're not really listening to the words, all they're listening to the tone. They're in survival mode. They can't process all the, and we might be saying to them, now listen, honey, and I've seen adults do this, if you just put the truck down, you can come inside the classroom. I have a lovely truck inside the classroom. That's not your, I watched teacher, that's not your truck, honey, that's Billy's truck, but I have another lovely truck for you in the class. And I could just see this little boy's eyes getting bigger and bigger because he didn't know what she was saying. He didn't know that she was promising him a truck inside the classroom. He just could hear her talking. And you know what? They just feel that intensity and you know what they're waiting to hear, which is so sad. And I've had it with you. Those are the words they're terrified to hear, but they're worried. So when we are working with children like this, we have to be so careful. Don't talk too much. Figure out what you can do without talking. So what does work with these kids? Well, we have to change the way in which we see them. It's not easy. It requires a huge shift. The more these kids swear at us and tell us, to go to wherever, the harder it is to want to be kind to them. But we do have to change how we intervene from what's wrong with this child? What do we need to do to fix him? To what's happened in the life of this child and what can we do to help? So there are developmental interventions that I recommend, and I'm going to go through these relatively quickly. I know that is frustrating for all of you. We will have some sessions on what else to do, and next week, if you have questions about what to do, I will elaborate on that. But there are guidelines, which means that every one of you can do these things in your own way. It's not a recipe that we're giving you, it's guidelines. Maximize attachment, compensate for the immaturity and the effects of trauma, build a village of attachments, minimize the influence of the other children, and allow for emotional expression and tears. This is basically our guiding principles. So when we do, we need to create this safe world. Every time we can, try and keep the relationships strong. Don't let the behavior cause divisions. At the end of a very, very difficult day, find one person in the school who can say to that child with as much honesty as possible, we're looking forward to seeing you tomorrow. Here, take my scarf and bring it back tomorrow because we want you here. Minimize the experience of separation. And we have some interventions that increase separation. I don't have time to go through them today, but I will spend some time on it. But don't make kids feel more separate. Don't cause them more separation. And then compensate for the effects. Provide options for when overwhelmed. Anticipate and prevent. The TP in the classroom, a quiet corner in the classroom, a quiet corner in the hallway, the safe space that Lynn provides. These are all ways that children who are overwhelmed, they can ask, please, can I go to Miss Lynn's room? Can I go into the TP? Can I go into the tent? These are all things that we can allow children to do. And we need to anticipate and prevent. In my class for children with severe behavior disorders, we actually realized that holidays, Christmas time, vacation time, actually for most children, they were happy about it. But for traumatized children, it caused huge distress for them because some of them didn't know what they were going to. School was their safe place. And so actually what we would do is before holidays, the teacher would do less, not more with the children and keep everything very organized. Provide the structure and predictability. Build a team of interveners. Use every resource in the school. A lot of our schools, we have lovely caretakers who develop a relationship with the children. Anybody's secretary. Some of the secretaries are absolutely wonderful. And offer a variety of intervention options, so safe place in the classroom, the nurturing support center, or the peace room like Lynn has, a safe place, an emotions room to express emotions. And then finally, we need to soften the defensive armor through emotional expression and play and help the child find their tears and provide many opportunities for play. I'm going to give you a few more things that you can do, and then I'm going to just finish off by talking about the importance of tears. So again, what these children need is a quiet, safe place with calm adults and a calm environment. And that might have to be somebody else's room, somebody else in the school. We have compassionate containment. The adult is calm, and it's called co-regulation. The child can regulate because of the adult. When the brain is soothed by the touch and by the close proximity of a caring adult. And we need to let children know it's okay to come for help, and I will help you as best I can. And we, again, don't use a whole lot of words, just the words that say, I'm here for you. It's okay. We'll get through this. But only one of those sentences at a time. It's okay, or we'll get through this. So just keep it simple. When there's trouble, try and stay calm. Use the breathing exercises. Try and use a neutral tone. Don't use too many words. In the moment, if the kid is melting down or having difficulty, that's not the time to teach a lesson. Manage the incident, not the child, and come alongside the child's feelings. We've had in one of the schools that I work at in English Montreal School Board, a school for children with behavior disorders, the staff trained themselves with a child who was like, when they were walking to the emotions room where the child had a chance, just to say the words, oh, this isn't working for you. And about 2 months later, somebody asked the children, because things were going well, and asked one of the children, have you noticed anything different? Oh, yes, this kid said, the you guys get me. Well, only thing they changed was saying to the child, it's not working for you. You're feeling so frustrated. The child felt understood. It made a huge difference. Compensating for the immaturity, if they get into trouble, just how can we get them extra adult supervision? Can we give them another activity to play? We had one little girl who was very, very, she was, I think I talked to you about her before. She was 3 years old. She was twice as big as any other child in the classroom. She could not play with other children because as soon as she got frustrated, she was bowled the other kids over. So, the teacher said, well, what am I going to do? Because she's going to become the class bully, not on purpose, because everyone's going to get scared of her. I said, every time if she's playing with other children, give her about a minute and a half and then go over to her and say, honey, come over here. I found this really interesting toy, and get her out of there. So she never outwears her welcome. And the teacher did that. And at the end of the year, she was not the class bully, and she was the proudest little girl because she had done well that year. But the teacher kept her out of trouble. And if let's say she did push another little girl, obviously you comfort the child who got pushed, and you just say to her, oh, sir, I'm sorry, sweetie, that just didn't work out very well for you. It was an accident. You didn't mean it for it to happen. And a 3-year-old and 4-year-olds don't mean to hurt other people. They just get overwhelmed. And then we need to manage non-structured situations like recess, hallways, and lockers. Don't let kids go there if there's not enough supervision. We need to anticipate and prevent for these immature children. Surround children with as many caring adults as possible. Help them to form the adults, and help the adults to form a relationship to them. When a new person comes in, you get an extra pair of hands. You got this owly little kid. You have to say, Billy can be a little bit owly sometimes and can say some things that he doesn't mean, but he's got a heart of gold inside. Oh my goodness, just watch for that heart of gold inside of him. Create a positive relationship with the parents. Call them, let them know you're taking care of their child. Welcome them warmly, especially when there's trouble. I remember these poor parents would be called to the school because their child got into trouble again, and I was finally I realized, oh my goodness, how horrible that must feel to that parent. So I would meet them at the door of the school. I'd say, I'm so happy that you came. Oh, it must have been so hard for you to take time off of work. Can I get you a cup of coffee? Can I get you a cup of tea? And they would look at me like, don't you hate me because now you have to have a meeting about my kid? Oh no, I'm so sorry. We did our best. Please come. We're just going to try and help your child. We had the most incredible cooperation from some of those parents. We had one stepfather who offered to come and pick up his stepsons every time they had a difficult day because he drove a delivery truck, and he said, just call me and I'll come by the school. I'll pick up my kid. I'll take him away for half an hour and I'll bring him back. Because when he came to the school, we said, we're so happy you came. right? And then behavior management systems sadly cause a whole bunch of separation. These children, those things don't work with them at all. And again, we'll talk again about what else you can do. But if you do all the other stuff, you won't need a behavior management system. If they do need to go away, and sometimes, trust me, that child needs to leave the room for your sake or for the sake of the other children, absolutely. But send them to somebody. Okay, either you can send them with a book. Oh, could you please bring this book to Miss Valerie? She really needs the book. Or oh, I forgot this envelope. Could you bring it to the secretary? Or you can have a foster classroom or the nurturing support center, the peace room. Always go to us, but after you sent them away, go to them and let them know it's okay. I want you back in the classroom, even if you've had you had to send them out of the room. And it's always up to us to restore the relationship with the child. Last thing that I want to share with you today is about vulnerability and resilience, because all of us as human beings can bounce back. When we've got this shell on, obviously it's affecting us. It's causing all sorts of weird things to happen. But if we soften, then growth can happen. And if we soften, then we can bounce back and become resilient. Certainly when I was first working in Indigenous communities, before we understood the effect of residential schools, people would look at the community and say, how are they ever going to bounce back? Well, many of these communities have bounced back and done things that nobody ever expected. Running your own education system. Trust me, when I was working in some communities 35 years ago, they'll never be able to run their own education system. And not only are you guys running your own education system, I think sometimes you're doing a better job than what's happening in the regular system. Bounce back can happen, growth can happen, but the process that's needed is the feeling of sadness, and tears are essential to adaptation. Tears can only happen when a child feels safe. So feelings of frustration, alarm, seeking, desire, if you can't, if all those needs can't be met, then the child can actually cry about it. So mad, scared, and wanting can turn to sadness. And when there's sadness and tears, then growth and development can happen. But what's really hard for us, especially those of us who are accompanying people who have to go through this adaptive process, the process by which we are changed by that which we cannot change, you actually have to go down into the deep dark. Again, with children, some children will do this to us. I know for my own daughter, she had a huge breakup, and she's given me permission to talk about it. Her heart was absolutely broken. Luckily, I was able to be with her through it. And she basically said that I don't know if I can survive this. And I had to let her cry and think about how scary it was to be alone. But then she finally, through her tears, all of a sudden started to bounce back and has created a beautiful life for herself. But she had to go through the grieving process, and she needed somebody that would be there with her and hold her in that deep, dark place until she was able to bounce back. The adaptive process requires a soft heart and a safe place to cry. And that means you need to be able to tolerate vulnerable feelings, but you can only do it if there's someone there who can be there with you to hold you in that sadness and that tears. And so these are some of the things that I've kind of learned over the years with my own children, with other people, and so these are the things that I think help us as adults to help not only our own children but even other adults to find their tears. The first step is because often adaptation starts off with a strong emotion. And so we need to go to where that emotion is. So if the child is, this is stupid. I mean, again, my daughter, I remember her calling me up on the phone. Oh, these people are so stupid. They never understand. I applied for that grant and it was the best grant anybody had ever written and they didn't give me that money. They're so stupid. Here's my adult daughter. I'm thinking, oh my goodness, she shouldn't be calling people stupid. But when I understood this stuff, I now stopped talking to her about saying stupid. And I said to her, oh my goodness, you worked so hard at writing that grant. They just don't understand how hard you worked. Or if somebody is really scared, a child says, I'm so scared, I'm so scared. What if you don't come back? What if you don't come back? Oh my goodness, you're scared. You're really scared that I wouldn't come back. And you talk about being scared. Or you talk about, oh, they really wanted them to like you. I remember, when somebody's breaking up and they want to get back with that person. And I mean, I knew that person wasn't the right person, but I couldn't go there. I had to say, no, you really wanted them to love you. But you have to say it with emotion. I had a parent who was saying to me, but Eva, I say that to my son. And I say, well, how do you say it? Oh, I understand that you're really frustrated. I said, I'm really sorry, but your child doesn't believe that you understand how frustrated he is because you're not giving him that message. You have to go there with that emotion. And people say, yeah, but if I say to my child, oh my goodness, you were really scared, isn't the child going to get more scared? Well, yeah, if you stay scared. Oh my goodness, I was so scared. What are we going to do? No, no, no. You go, oh my goodness, you were really scared. You just weren't sure that your mom wasn't going to come back. But then you subtly move towards the sadness. So when my daughter said, those people are so stupid, I would say, oh my goodness, they didn't understand how hard you worked. Oh, it's so frustrating for you when you try so hard. Well, and then I had to be silent. Could she go to her sadness? Well, yes, luckily she could, because the next thing I knew, she burst into tears. And and what's so interesting here is that when I used this process with my daughter, it was on the phone. It was often usually on the phone because she tried to find me wherever she was. The first few times, she kind of slammed the phone down on me because she thought I was going to tell her what to do. Later on, she would call me up and she would say, "Mom, those people," and she would burst into tears as she started talking to me. Then I would get a voicemail from her. She burst into tears when she heard my voice on the voicemail. And then she said, Mom, one day she says, Mom, I didn't even know I needed to cry. She said, I started putting in your phone number and I started crying. This process can be so powerful when children believe that we are safe. And if you have a child who comes home or cuts into your car and takes one look at you and bursts into tears, that's the biggest gift you can get. The biggest gift. And so when they do start to cry, and we don't know why. I mean, in this scenario, we kind of brought them to their tears, right? I helped my daughter find her tears. Sometimes children will come into our office, come into our classroom, come into our home, come into the center, burst into tears. We have to be very careful not to ask why they're crying. Because when my daughter was little, she would cry because there was all sorts of things that went wrong that day. And when and then mommy, and so if we ask, sometimes they think they have to give us a big enough reason to cry because somebody has told them, well, that's not a big enough reason to cry. If a child starts crying, imagine a sea of tears in them that they've been gathering all up, all of their tears, gathering them all up and saving them for you, and they're crying about everything. I mean, that's the same thing for us. I don't know about the rest of you right now, but I mean, I do a lot of crying when I'm watching TV. A lot of crying. Why? Because there's a sea of tears inside of me about how crazy the world is now with COVID. We have to grieve COVID over and over and over again, right? And so basically, when the tears start, just sit with compassion. This is the hardest thing, by the way, for alphas to do, because all of you are alphas. All of you want to take care of people. All of you want to fix their problems from the best place in your heart possible. But right now, that's not the thing to do. If I had tried to tell my daughter, okay, no, it's all right, honey, you'll get a grant another day. It's all right, honey, you'll find somebody else, she would have never talked to me again. You know, slam that phone down and never come back. I had to sit quietly. I actually remember sitting on my hands, biting my lip, biting my tongue so I wouldn't say anything. I often say to people, if you want to say words, you have to say something. Just make a little sound in your throat, like, but just something to let them know I'm here for you, but I'm not going to tell you what to do. And oops, hang on here. I'm for some reason I'm not. Resist the alpha instincts to make things better or to problem solve. This is not the time. You have to let them go into that sadness. You have to sob. And it breaks your heart when that happens. It breaks your heart, but that's when the healing starts to happen. And again, one of the things that struck me in the Truth and Reconciliation, again, it was so clear. So many of these men had not said anything to anybody, and they're sitting there with tears streaming down their face. And finally, I've been able to tell people what happened to me, and they knew that the tears had to come. So we just have to let those tears flow, give lots of space to sadness and tears. And if afterwards the child says, "What can I do?" we can give a solution, but usually they don't need a solution. Either they come up with them themselves, or they just needed a good cry and not a solution to life. Just be there with them. So we need to remember these challenging students. I'm crabby, everybody, leave me alone. I hate everyone. No one recognizes my hints to smother me with affection, right? When the flower, doesn't bloom, you fix the environment. We need to do whatever we can to help these children, because when we can do that, they will surpass in their growth and development anything we could ever imagine. They will become the kind of people we want them to be. But we have to understand that for some of them, they're going to need a lot of help. So let me just stop sharing here. Whew. See if Lynn, I don't know if you want to just make a few comments. I know I appealed to you quite a few times there. No, your microphone is muted again for some reason.
Hi, okay, sorry about that. Okay, so yeah, this presentation was amazing because all of the students that you described, the different, symptoms of, what can happen to them, we seen them all and we continue to see them. And, I just find that, in today, I mean, it's sad to say, but it seems to be escalating, so, I mean, this year, we even with, I think we have a third of our population in there, the ones that came in are essential, but some of them fall under that vulnerable category. And, it's all we can do is be that soft, safe, place. And so many students through the years of, the work that I've been doing just come to mind with different things. And like you said, there's some of them that can have all of them. But at least now you're, putting theory behind it, and explaining why they're behaving like that and what it is that we need to do. So I hope, next week with the sharing and the questions that, some of the teachers will come with their own concerns. And, there's areas where you said you could go in more depth, but time constraint,
Yeah.
And I just remember just one boy stuck in my mind, where he ended up being in that role of bully. But we knew his background. The mother was rough around the edges, the father not so, but the mother was the alpha in the relationship. The father worked away a lot, months at a time, the type of work that he had. So he missed his father a lot. I think he had a more soft relationship with the father as opposed to the mother. So there was a lot of that, bullying, and he would target one particular boy, and we started working together. But eventually, I got him, I says, instead of, telling me, because I asked him, I says, are you bullying this boy? And I says, instead of answering from your mind that wants to protect you, I says, I want you to answer me from your heart that is loving and caring. And so, because I've seen him a few times, and finally he answered me and he said, yes.
Yeah.
He answered because I brought him to the heart. And so I says, now we can work with that.
Yeah.
So we started to work with it and behavior improved. And yes, his mother was the type that would get a phone call from the school quite often because, of his survival with
Yep.
frustration and everything else.
Yeah.
So she would, if she saw the number, she would just say, "What now?" She doesn't even say hello.
No.
Like, what now? What did he do now? And so I was now, because of the improvement, I said, well, I'm giving you a positive phone call.
Oh.
Her response to me was, I prefer no phone calls.
Yeah.
That was her answer to me.
Yeah.
And like, that broke my heart. And I says, that tells me a lot
Yeah.
about why this boy, was behaving and reacting the way he was, because of, lack of attachment and the nurturing and,
Yeah.
everything else that he needed,
Yeah. And
in order
the
to
thing I always
be
remember is that if
who he is.
the parent herself, she's been wounded as well, right? She herself probably had a wounding. So this is where we talk about kind of things going down through generations, because wounding can wound again. But how do we break that cycle? And again, what I'm seeing in so many places and so many of our schools is we're working at trying to break that cycle, to minimize that cycle, to, yeah.
Mhm. So we continued to work with him, and he graduated, and where he is now, I'm hoping that he's in a good place. And
Yeah.
as time went on, he was they had a better relationship.
Yeah.
The boy that he started, was bullying. They
Good.
ended up having a better relationship. So that was
Yeah.
nice. It was really nice, the outcome on that one.
Well, because now he could lean on you, so he didn't have to count on himself to protect himself, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, no, it's incredible work that you're doing in that room with those kids. Yeah, yeah. I know Val or Sarah, if either of you want to say something or add to it. I don't know if there's any questions. I didn't notice.
Well, for myself, Eva, this is the theory. Then when I listen to it, I watch it, I can connect to so much of myself, of my dad, who's a survival of residential schools, and my family's children's and nephews, and so it's so making sense in a way. And I love the tools. I think I take a picture of it and make poster and check box, and just so I can remind them to use them in everydays. You have sometimes instincts, but like a big alpha complex, I'm probably doing too much. But like, so I'll try to refocus, but and then it brings me to Phyllis Webstad's Every Child Matter campaign.
Oh, yeah.
So she's a survival, and then she's so we have this date, it's September 30th, and then we have to remember it's not just one day.
No.
It's every day that we have to think about how can we make an effect on those children's life, and then by Lynn's example, in those parents' life too. Maybe it doesn't open a door right now, but we don't know what will be the future for these parents and then these children. So maybe just an action and try her best every day with knowing the theory, knowing what will be the effect, knowing the understanding of the iceberg at the beginning. Well, so don't try to understand everything, but just be there. So of course, First Nation, our ancestor didn't know about all the brain, but they were really good at noticing and then being there. They were good at be present, and they're really living with a lot of relation with all together. So I think we need to build back this disconnect from our iPhone and try to build real relation. It's hard these days, but just maybe a phone call. Sometimes pick a friend, long time you didn't see, phone call and try to reconnect and do the same. And I'm just so always grateful for the job that the teacher and educator do every day in their school. You have all my, I'm so blessed that you choose this job and you can do that for our children.
Just want to say that sometimes I used to work with, before FNEC, I used to work with children and young adults also, but we're pretty much trauma. So, but no, noticing that just sometimes smiling, but a true smile. And I had that big guy that came to me one day and he said, when you smile, we know it's true. We can see your sincerity. And from that, and even if it would come into our classroom and it would be grumpy, I would always try to connect and smile. And then, but one day, you open up with that, saying that, it's really sincere, your
Mm,
smile. And then, and he came back to me and he was able to speak and he said, do you know how a smile can change someone's life? And I always remember that. And it wasn't a big action because sometimes we think it's big recipe and we have to do big, big things, But no, it's like really simple, just a smile. I'm there, and keeping faith and being there, day after day. And I think it kind of changes life sometimes. And I remember being in the staff room and they were saying, well, they came late, they come late, they don't dress properly, they don't do this, they don't do that. And I stood up and I said, well, but they come every day. And instead of saying bad things and how they should be, we should be standing at the front door and applauding that they're coming, because with all the life that they've been through, we wouldn't even be able to spend one day in their shoes.
yeah,
So we should be grateful and welcoming them and be happy. So, I think sometimes it's just small thing, that
yeah,
we can do, but that changes.
yeah, yeah. And just a little gesture, right? Just as you
Yeah.
said, a smile. I'm happy to see you. I'm so glad you're here today. That because I mean, a lot of these children, and again, that the little guy that you were talking about, Lynn, I'm sure if he was able to tell you from his heart that he was bullying, then there were times when he really knew what he was doing was wrong. Like his defenses went down and he could feel, oops, I shouldn't be doing this. And so he probably felt really guilty and he was so scared to tell you, and so then he would hide, we make it hard for children to tell us that they made a mistake, that they did something wrong, that they didn't get it right. But I mean, again, it's so hard because you can't give anybody a script, but just the beautiful way in which you looked at him with welcoming and you just said, don't speak with your head, speak with your heart. I know there's a heart in there. I mean, he felt so welcome in your presence. And and then all of a sudden the truth came out. And he knew if he told you the truth, you would work with him, not consequence of. So
Mhm.
this is what we're doing here, is just giving space for this natural desire and instinct to be good, to be caring, to be empathetic.
And that's the glory of the room,
Yeah,
because teachers have 17, 18 students, and
exactly.
it takes time,
Yes.
so it's like the relationship has to, not that they don't have relationships with their student, but when students are acting out, they don't have the
No.
time to devote to hear the story and whatever, so this was a playground uh incident,
Hmm.
because
Hmm.
they weren't in the same class. But so that's why, I was involved with this one, and I
Yeah.
could give the time that's
Yes.
needed. And, so sometimes, I have students in there for, we try not to get them in there too long, but
Hmm.
sometimes it takes 15, 30 minutes, and I
Absolutely.
try to bring in our cultural ways, our cultural
Yeah.
teachings in there, and it's really delicate. You have
Yeah.
to take their lead. And
Hmm.
I know, like, there was one where you're talking about the runners, and where we're located, there's a lot of roads and it's busy.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
We have
Yeah.
to be careful with the runners. But we had one guy who fell into that. And grade 5, he kind of settled down a little bit, but he was a runner. And if Cynthia's still on, she knows who I'm going to be talking about, because she's had to go after this one for, a few
Oh, yeah.
times. But what he needed, like, he would put himself in the locker sometimes,
Yeah.
and we couldn't talk to him. The more you would want to talk
Yep.
to him, you had to have the silence, like you said. Anyway, whoever it wasn't myself, maybe it was Cynthia. Anyway, you could only speak to him through notes.
Mhm.
So in the locker, you put the piece of paper through the locker, he takes it, he looks at it and responds,
Yeah.
through the paper and gives it back. And that was the way
Yeah.
that he could be communicated to in that vulnerable time in his life.
Yeah. And look at how clearly he tells you, I'm scared, I'm overwhelmed, it's too much. He finds a locker and he locks himself in, right? And yeah, but the beauty of it, but look at how and then he makes it really clear to you you can't talk to him. So you guys had to be creative. But look still how he didn't want to cut off communication with you, but talking made him feel too vulnerable.
Yeah.
With reading, he can read it or not read it. There's no tone, right? So like doesn't get distracted by the tone, and then he could really ingest what it is you were saying. And I'm sure you were saying things to him that made him feel it's okay, we're here for you, we're going to help you, right? And so then bit by bit he started trusting you. But that, as you say, there's no recipe. I can't tell you the next time you got a kid in a locker that you can pass him notes. Well, first of all, he's got to be able to read. You aren't going to do that with a 4-year-old. But yeah, it's always that dance. It's always reading them, but reckon. The other analogy that's a really good analogy, but we don't have them in Quebec, are hedgehogs. I'll try and remember to bring a picture of a hedgehog. But those little prickly animals. My son had one, and it was as soon as he got scared, you couldn't even pick him up because he was so spiky. And bit by bit, it was a little baby that had been abandoned by its mother, so he was very hard to deal. My son was so patient with him, and eventually he could put him in his hand, and the spike stayed down. But I think he worked for at least 6 months. And if any noise happened, the spikes went up. And that's what these children are like. But they have a soft heart inside. But they have to protect themselves. And we know, again, we know some of the situations they go back. And as you said, Valerie, if we were living what those children were living, we would be on medical leave of absence. Nobody would expect us to work. They would say, go home, take care of yourself, go see a doctor, and, take 6 months to rest. But of course, for some children, the safest place for them is in our schools. And I think every school to me should have a room like yours, Lynn, or a couple of rooms like yours when things are really hard in the community, because it's the place we as a community care for our children. And I think, again, Sarah, what you were saying is that when there's a large community taking care of the children, it doesn't matter if mommy and daddy aren't in a good mood. Like, this is our problem in kind of the North American society, where everyone's in their little house, is if mommy and daddy are in a bad mood, you're out of luck, right? In a Mexican household, you'd go next door to your aunt and uncle and next door to your grandparents, and there'd be always somebody to go find who would take care of you if mommy and daddy couldn't. So I think that community aspect, and sometimes, again, people don't understand in your communities that one of the reasons why, not all the time, but one of the reasons why children do wander from house to house is also because it's okay. We are there as a community to take care of the children. So they're less affected by things that would affect a child in a city who has nobody to go to, right? So there's strengths in your communities that sometimes we don't always appreciate or notice. I'm sure, hopefully, there will be lots of questions for next week. If you have something that's on your mind and you want to write to Valerie, but let's say you don't want your name associated with it because you don't necessarily want somebody to know maybe which community the child is from, just write to her, and then we can also, it'll help me to prepare some answers and things. But
Yeah, of course, if that's something that we do. When you write me a question or a comment and you would like to have help, and Eva could answer on the time to share, but we won't say names, or we'll keep
yeah,
it confidential. So you're more than welcome to do that. And well, I just want to say thanks also for coming, because it only takes one person also to notice and understand that. And then when something happened with a child that behaved that we don't really know, that we can say, like how we can act differently. And then it started to change at the same time. And this is the beauty of it. And it can really touches children, and changes their life, definitely, so
Yeah.
thanks for being there. And then we have a question. Was there a new schedule put out, or do we follow same one that was giving out in February? Actually, it's every Wednesday, so I I think I forgot to send it today. I'm so sorry, but yesterday, as I sent the email, but it's next week, and I can probably send it.
Yeah, maybe we could send it with the handout as well, with the
Yeah, I
slides.
will
Maybe.
send
Yeah.
it with the yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess there's no question.
Well, thank you, Diane. Appreciate your feedback. Yes, I'm always so grateful to Dr. Neufeld and to the neuroscientists who who help us understand, because boy, when I was a psychologist, I sometimes was quite confused by children's behavior. I just didn't know how to understand it, and this has helped me so much. Yeah. Good.
Thank you, Lynn, for sharing all your experience and all your good intervention with your students. Also, it's really inspiring.
Thank you.
Merci, Eva. Well, thank you, Eva. Sarah.
Oh, pleasure, pleasure. Good. Well, we'll see everybody next week, hopefully.
Yeah.
Yes, we want to hear your sharing, and I have lots of questions, Eva.
Good.
And I think I want to spend a day or two in Lynn's room.
Okay, I have something from Cynthia. Denise Fendley is a keynote speaker next week at the symposium, and it's at 1:00. And she talks about culture as medicine, but she's also trained as a Neufeld.
Yes, she's part of the Neufeld faculty.
Neufeld trainer. So you will probably notice all the.
You'll hear some words that sound the same, and it's because she's been trained by Dr. Neufeld as well, but has incorporated into her First Nations way of doing things. So she's a lovely, lovely speaker, and I think you'll really enjoy her. Yeah, culture as medicine. She's got a beautiful program called Gathering Our Medicine. So yeah.
Oh. Thank you, Cynthia.
Good.
Registration deadline tomorrow. It's okay.
Good.
Okay, well, have a good night.
Okay, so see you next week.
Next week.
Good, Lynn. Thank you so much.
I enjoyed it.